Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L'Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
All right, so today we are going to look back at the season. We are currently in season 6 and wrapping up season 6. And as is our custom, Eryn and I like to review the season on our final episode of the season. I guess we call it the season finale. So we're going to be talking about the topics that we covered, things that we remember, maybe common themes during the season. I think season 6 probably started around maybe late spring, I want to say, and it carried through till now, which is the end of October. And yeah, we're just going to see where this conversation takes us. So when I think about season 6, I think a lot about trust, relationships, looking at healing, different modalities of healing, also working with different strengths that we might have. We talked about strengths recently. And I think probably what sticks out for me in this season is that there was a lot of exploration with, I want to say, like kind of expanding our perspective. We were looking at things differently. That seemed to be kind of a theme this season. What do you think, Eryn?
I love the concept of looking at things differently because it really makes me think of a few of our episodes. One in particular on when we had various interviews. Sorry, I want to take a step back. In particular, our various interviews were pretty diverse this season in terms of what they brought to the coaching topics. And in particular, episode 12, where we talked about our strengths feeling like flaws and how we can reclaim those natural gifts. That to me really speaks to your pointed observation, L'Shawn, about what season 6 was really about. And, I think there's a lot of perspective shifting throughout because we tackle things like what it's like to experience a rage room and, our own perspective shifting through all of that. And then we go through a mini coaching session and speak with many people of various backgrounds that have a touch point with coaching. So I think that really, I like how you have kind of layered this full theme for season 6 for this episode here. And I think this time too, we had a lot of local interviews, people more local here close by. And so that's something else that kind of was a little bit different than maybe some of our past interviews where people were a little bit further away geographically. And season 6, there was this level of maturity of coaching concepts that we had addressed in various ways in prior seasons. But in the way that they were addressed in season 6, I think there was a level of deeper understanding, deeper commitment to the coaching process, to being curious, to leading with love. And I think you see that play out episode after episode in season 6. So those are some of my initial observations.
Yeah, I want to add to that too, what you said, Eryn, because I feel like, and I might be wrong, but it seems like this season, the people that we interviewed had, coaching as a profession, or coaching was more part of what they did. Like they were, it was in their title, as a coach. And I think this season, we really did touch on like the technical aspects of coaching, how coaching can show up like in the coaching space, but also how it can be used in, everyday life, because, our podcast is, coaching wisdom for everyday life. So I did notice that there was definitely more of a, I want to say like more of it, like an explicit look at coaching. It was like, in coaching, we do this. And And even, with our interview with Gabriella Richardson, she talked more in detail about like frameworks and things that she used with coaching. Like, how do we define beliefs? How do we, you know, really getting into like the technical aspect of the science of coaching almost. And also the art, which I thought was, I think a different way of a different way that interviews have shown up in our podcast. It's kind of like my memory. That's kind of what's coming up in my memory is that there, like you said, Eryn, there were a lot of more coaching centered conversations. I mean, even the mini coaching sessions is an example of how we're looking at coaching as a tool and as a process and the frameworks that we use. Another thing that really comes up for me, just if we look at our podcast and how it is evolving and the evolution of our podcast, this season seems more, I don't want to say polished, but I feel like this season's like we're really into a groove. Like things are they seem so much more um, routine for me. I don't know how to describe that, but I feel like in the evolution of our podcast, we've matured as podcast hosts. The flow of our interviews were almost seamless, and we seem to have this cadence that is characteristic now of our interviews. And I noticed this when I interviewed Kim Jandro by myself when you were away. There was definitely a different feel to that. And then when we interviewed our next guest who came on when you came back, I could tell the different feel, the different questions, and how there is definitely a signature that we have in our interviews and in our podcasts that seems to be solidifying or developing. First, we were kind of getting used to the whole podcast thing, getting used to what we were doing. And then this season, it's like we're more seasoned, for lack of a better word. What are your thoughts, Eryn?
Yeah, I think that we do have a pretty clear flow to our episodes that make it probably fairly accessible, or at least quite accessible for people to jump in at any point and kind of understand where we're at in the conversation. And I think that, as I think of reflecting back on season 6, I can also reflect on my own life through this season of maturity. And I think that my maturity of letting go more and being, I guess, receptive to what is there, but with the universe or whatever is being presented, whether that is something spiritual, something in proximity geographically, or people, those sorts of things. I think there's a level of this parallel between hosting this podcast now for multiple years and learning to kind of let go as well. And the podcast being a through line or something that is helping me to do that, because I have to be able to, every week come here and speak into this microphone and, talk about key coaching concepts or things related to coaching that really matter to me and matter to the work that I do to help people. And just by having that platform of this conversation with you, I think that is another level of maturity in my own life, where that is trickling into how I engage everyday relationships, how I think and about my work and how I actually do the work that I do, and how I parent as well and be a partner. And so it's interesting because all this is coming up this season right now, and that really makes me think of relationships and the relational aspect of coaching and the relational aspect of how that plays out in my own life as well. But through being able to talk through these concepts, I have gained more skills and more aptitude in how I relate to my relationships and how I engage those, like I mentioned, whether that's at the personal level as a parent or in my work and so forth. So I think one key theme of this season is that relational component. And, You can see that in many episodes in this season, such as Coaching at Its Hope for one, and others. And I think this is an important time of year to reflect on that. Going into the holidays, sometimes we can really reflect on gratitude and lean into that as a key practice that can help us on our life journey. But we can also reflect on other things or what's happened in the past to look forward, and what's happened with our relationships in the past to figure out, how we move forward as well. So I think this season has helped me elevate how I think about my relationships and what I actually want to do with them in my life.
Yeah, I agree. I think this season is a reflection of not only relational aspects, but also how we interact with others and expanding that perspective, and also exploration. I think exploration is also a theme of this season as well, in terms of exploring different modalities, from hypnosis to emotional piece of healing. And I just remember different conversations that we had, especially with Tyler Slade, which was our latest episode, where he was talking about the different ways that coaches might work with adolescents or young adults, and just seeing things through a broader lens, and not just broad, but also maybe even zeroing in on or zooming in on. I'm reminded of our conversation about how we were looking at stuckness and stillness, and how we started out by talking about stuckness, and what emerged was this conversation and this realization of stillness, and how stillness can really allow for things to be revealed or to emerge and come out of stuckness. So you have the stuckness, but I guess the flip side or the silver lining of stuckness is that stillness that comes with it. So, just looking at things differently, going back to Eryn, our conversation about strengths, and the really unique way that you approached our conversation around strengths, and how sometimes our strengths can be perceived as weaknesses or flaws or something that we need to work on. And also the really interesting piece that you brought in, Eryn, was how we might see other people's strengths as annoyances, or, a source of conflict, when really what we might be seeing is their strengths. And maybe we have different ways of showing up, and that are reframing the way that we see people who we might have conflict with, or that we might differ from, as, hey, maybe I'm seeing their strengths. So that was an interesting conversation. So a lot of perspective taking, and also shifting perspectives, broadening perspectives, exploring new ways of healing, new ways of looking at things, new frameworks. I really liked that aspect of season 6. So listeners, when you have a chance to go back to season 6 and look at some of those episodes and see, or listen to some of those episodes and see what really comes out, what really sticks out for you. And I think that, even if we went back to some of our earlier seasons and episodes, it would be interesting to listen to those again and see what sticks out that may not have at the time, because I'm in a different phase, or I'm in a different place, or I really feel like I'm evolving and expanding a lot this year, going back to what you said, Eryn, about like your personal life and how that's kind of showing up for you, that maturation, that evolution. And I feel that way too about my own life, that I feel like things are gelling and things are really coming together and blossoming in my life, that reflects in the conversations that we have, I think, in this season. What are some thoughts that you're having, Eryn?
Well, when you first went back to the episode on stuckness and stillness, it was a big, just like light bulb moment again to just reiterate that concept. And I just love how, stillness can be a way to move with stuckness. And what a powerful concept, I think. And, it's interesting because I have over here to the side, and I'm not through it yet, but it's just kind of a meditative book by Brother Lawrence on like practicing the presence of God in everything that you do, kind of thing. But it relates to that concept. So that's what made me think of this when I have it sitting over here off to the side, and maybe it's saying, hey, stillness, being more present. That is key. I don't know. So yeah, that's showing up for me right now. And then going back to the strengths conversation, I always enjoy talking about people's strengths, and then also the twist of, we often might perceive fault in others when actually those are their strengths. I think that's a real big perspective shift and a mind shift, and how we can come together at the personal level, but also collectively to find a way to have to make meaning together and cross various lines of divide. And so I think it's an interesting concept to play with at that both kind of macro micro level, and maybe that's something we can further look at in the next season, in season 7, in that way. And I want to go back to the maturation of our episodes, and then your maturation as well. I mean, I just want to highlight that L'Shawn has been through pretty much a year long leadership course in Boulder County, and really helping her become more of a community leader, I think was one of the kind of keys to this training. And just seeing you go through that this whole year and seeing you gain more confidence, I think, as an ancillary effect of this process has been something that I've noticed in you as you've gone, through this program that was quite rigorous. It took up a lot of your time and energy. Yeah. So I think that, some of the things that have been going on in the background with our podcast, there has been a lot that we've been kind of holding. So, I mentioned L'Shawn and her work in the leadership community. And then with my book coming out, that was a big lift throughout the summer and throughout the year. And then L'Shawn and I working toward all throughout this process, our journal that we're releasing in the coming months. That's really a powerful guided journal that helps people understand some of the coaching nuggets of wisdom and how they can apply them to their own lives. And I'm really, really, really excited about this journal. It's looking at more of the seasons from early on. So that's really exciting, because I'm sure, there will be more iterations in the future, but just to be able to go back to what were some of those key coaching nuggets of wisdom from the first couple of seasons. How do they relate to our own lives, and how can we code them and theme them in a way that helps people move from inspiration to action to flourishing? And that's what this journal is all about doing. And so I'm really excited about that coming out soon. And I think that's something else that this season has helped us stay focused on, that journal too. So another kind of key underlying project that had a reciprocal relationship with the podcast, right? I feel like there's so much reciprocity with what we say on the podcast, and then what shows up in our own lives and in the work that we do. And so I guess just one kind of key takeaway from that as well for listeners is, it is nice to have conversations with friends or with someone and record them and then listen to them and learn from them, because as we are talking during our podcast recordings, we're learning from what we say, what each other has to say, and what we hear ourselves say. But what's also really neat is when you go back and listen, there's so much more to learn. And I think that that's been a key part of my process this year too, is going back and really listening to the episodes from this season.
Yeah, it's a really, well, thank you for acknowledging the leadership program that I was part of. And I would say that experience was a big part in my evolution and as a leader, as a community leader. And it's really inspirational as well. Like, it inspires so many things. You have so much information coming at you, so many things that you learn in this program, and there's so many resources out there, and part of this program is networking with other leaders. So you learn about their projects and the things that they're working on. And I think that this also applies to what we bring into this podcast with interviewing many different people. And we hear so many different stories, and we can see those themes throughout, themes of hope, themes of resilience, themes of self-love and care, meeting people where they are, that those themes throughout, which help to, it illustrates how we have a lot more in common than we do have differences. So that's another thing that I noticed about just the podcast in general, and especially season 6. We bring in different voices. So we have different perspectives of similar topics like hope, resilience, relationships, boundaries, difficult conversations. That's a theme that's come up not only in this season and in episodes in this season, but in other seasons, the idea of difficult conversations. And I love, Eryn, how you brought that into so many of our speaker episodes where you would ask that question to different speakers and we would get different answers to that same question. And so it's really interesting to see how people respond to that difficult questions. And I think, or not difficult questions, difficult conversations. And one thing that really sticks out, maybe because it's, recent, is our interview with Tyler Slade from Untapped Learning. His answer to that question about how do you approach difficult conversations really resonated with me, because that brings back the relational aspect that you were talking about, Eryn, about how relationships play into this. And he said, building that trust and building that relationship from the get-go helps to have those difficult conversations. That says that we really need to be building trust and building relationships and, being in the present moment, even on the macro level, societal level. If we really go back to the basics, go back to those relational aspects where people are not just a number and they're not just a vote, or, they're actually someone that we want to have a relationship with, that we want to know their story. We want to know what they value. And it's not just a talking point. It's actually sincerely, that's what we want to know. So I think if we could bring it back to that, if we can bring it back to building that trust, and that goes back to our conversation about boundaries. And it also goes back to our conversation with, other coaches that have come on, with Gabriella Richardson, Zolita Grant, other guest speakers that have come on and we've interviewed, just how important it is to focus on building that foundation. Because if we don't have that foundation, or if that foundation is rocky, or if that foundation is not very solid, it is a challenge to have difficult conversations. What are your thoughts, Eryn?
I love that you go back to trust, and Tyler's example of how that relates to relationships. I think it's really helpful on so many levels. And I think that it's part of a time and intention. So a time-bound process that takes time to develop, and it's intentional. And that's what I like to say about our work with grief. We, with time and intention, right? That's how we integrate our grief. But that's how we develop a lot of different skills, whether that's shooting a free throw, on a basketball court, which is an aside I'm currently doing in a men's league. And let me just say it's rough. But anyway, yeah. So I actually, you know what? I'm just going to go there. I'm going to go on that train of thought. And this is what Tyler said too, right? Or I think it was in his conversation of like, we can't just have canned questions, right? Maybe it was actually in an article I read. Anyway, we can respond to what is there in the present. And that's why coaching is so magical, because you're not coming in with these pre-scripted, questions. But anyway, this concept of trust, and then my little kind of tangent on the basketball, is because I am playing in a men's league, I do not trust myself because of the exterior conditions, and then also like the lack of confidence piece. And so some might look at that and say, oh, wow, she's very confident. Look at her, she's actually doing this thing. And then on the other end of it, it's like, yeah, but what is the internal response that is being felt or had, or then the actual effects on my skills and my ability and my, the work that I've done in basketball over many, 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 many years of time and intention. And so what I'm getting to, just out of this like light bulb moment for myself right now, is with that time and intention, we need to find ways to ensure confidence, right? And we talk about that in scaffolding with coaching, where we provide little by little to help people get to where they need and want to be. But I think there's something else here with this concept, and maybe we can explore it next season too around confidence. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And then what happens when your brain kind of has these pathways that jolt it or won't let it happen, won't let that confidence really manifest, even though it could. Like, so for instance, I am warm up, I'm making every single shot. And then in the game, I would have less confidence. So I'm not making my shots, right? I'm not making, and I think that just is a good metaphor for coaching and how we help people gain more confidence in themselves. And clearly, rec league basketball, I'm really in it to run up and down the court, right? And get some exercise. That is the goal. But on a larger scale, that pattern of lack of confidence is what has shown up in my life time and time and time and time again. And because of that, that's what's hindered certain progress. So I'm just highlighting this coaching concept here of we've worked on trust and relationship building in season 6, and we've worked on strength spotting and hope and a lot of things. And I think one piece to layer into that moving forward is this piece of confidence and how that can be threaded through, so that no matter if you're speaking in front of 500 people or participating in a rec basketball league, it's there. It's a consistent. And I know that might be super ideal for a lot of people, but I'll just speak even as a coach, right? In my own life, that seems to be one of the key areas of stuckness. Going back to the episode on stuckness, for me, is that lack of confidence to show up at the right time and that sort of thing. So anyway, went down kind of, instead of just reflecting back, kind of this took me forward to the next season and thinking about how we can maybe include more confidence and examples of that.
Yeah, that's so intriguing. I would love to hear more about your experience playing for a men's league. That's something. That would be definitely an episode in itself. But I like that you mentioned the thing about confidence, because that also reminds me of our conversation with Tyler Slade, where he talked about how the students have buy-in when they start seeing results with the work that they're doing with their tutors, their mentors, and they start to see results. And I think part of building that confidence is just giving yourself little wins and acknowledging the progress you've made, acknowledging the step that you've taken to step outside of your comfort zone and into a zone of growth. So there's so much there. And it also does come back to the relational aspect, to the building trust, not only with others, but also with yourself, building that trust with yourself, trust in yourself, trust in your abilities, trust in your strengths, and leveraging those strengths so that you can grow and learn more about yourself and surprise yourself, maybe even. So yeah, that's it's a great point that you're making, tangential or not. I think it goes well with the theme that we are talking about in terms of growth and development and scaffolding and all of those things that we do as coaches and we do as human beings. I think it really is a great example of how there's so many layers there. Because one of the things that you talked about with the basketball, like people might see, oh, wow, you're joining a men's league and so you must be very confident in your abilities. But what's going on internally might be very different. So that's another interesting piece that you brought in there. The other piece that you brought in was the idea of time and intention, which I love, the idea of time and intention, and how important it is to remain present in the present moment with that time and intention as a kind of guide. Am I being intentional here? Is this intentional? Am I being reactionary? And if so, if I'm reacting to this, how can I pivot and respond? So just, being aware of that, and also being aware of your intentions, like what is it that you want to build, or what is it that you want to experience, or what is it that you want to focus on as you're moving along in the process.
that feels like a good segue into a coaching
Yeah.
nugget of wisdom.
Yep. 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 I think so too. Yeah. I mean, one thing that comes up to me as a coaching nugget of wisdom is the act of reflecting or the act of looking back, the act of reviewing something. Where can you find time and space for looking back at a season in your life? It could be an actual season like summer, since we're now into fall, or a season as in maybe a time in your work when you were especially green and just starting out, as opposed to maybe in a space where you feel really comfortable what you're doing and you're becoming a master or an expert in what you're doing. So it might be a worthwhile exercise to take the time to review a season in your life. Eryn, what's your coaching nugget of wisdom?
I love that about reflection because that's where I was headed in terms of my own thinking and feeling as well. And I like how you articulated that. And it makes me feel inspired to reflect, outside of just reflecting on this season within our podcast. Because even in just reflecting on this season, it's like, oh yeah, this led me to realize this huge gap in confidence, looking forward. And so you're right, reflection is not may feel a little bit scary or like it's not worth the time because you're already moving forward, but it is worth the time. And so I think that my coaching nugget of wisdom is going back to relationship and the relational aspect of what we've talked about in our conversation today, and then also reflection as well. And, really thinking about and honoring those relationships that have been healthy for you in this past season and how you can show gratitude for those individuals moving forward into this next stage of your life.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L'Shawn with Michelle's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.